Book 2, Chapter 37 of Resurrection. The trap passed the fireman, who stood sentinel at the entrance. The headquarters of the fire brigade and the police stations are generally together in Moscow. Drove into the yard of the police station and stopped at one of the doors. In the yard, several firemen with their sleeves tucked up were washing some kind of cart and talking loudly. When the trap stopped, several policemen surrounded it, and taking the lifeless body of the convict under the arms, took him out of the trap, which creaked under him. The policeman who had brought the body got down, shook his numbed arm, took off his cap, and crossed himself. The body was carried through the door and up the stairs. Nekhludoff followed. In the small dirty room where the body was taken, there stood 4 beds. On 2 of them sat a couple of sick men in dressing gowns, one with a crooked mouth, whose neck was bandaged, the other one in consumption. 2 of the beds were empty. The convict was laid on one of them. A little man, with glistening eyes and continually moving brows, with only his underclothes and stockings on, came up with quick, soft steps, looked at the convict, and then at Nekhludoff, and burst into loud laughter. This was a madman who was being kept in the police hospital. "They wish to frighten me, but no, they won't succeed," he said. The policemen who carried the corpse were followed by a police officer and a medical assistant. The medical assistant came up to the body and touched the freckled hand, already growing cold, which, though still soft, was deadly pale. He held it for a moment and then let it go. It fell lifelessly on the stomach of the dead man. "He's ready," said the medical assistant, but evidently to be quite in order. He undid the wet brown shirt, and tossing back the curls from his ear, put it to the yellowish, broad, immovable chest of the convict. All were silent. The medical assistant raised himself again, shook his head, and touched with his fingers first one and then the other lid over the open, fixed blue eyes. I'm not frightened, the madame kept repeating these words, and spitting in the direction of the medical assistant. "Well," asked the police officer. "Well, he must be put into the mortuary." "Are you sure, mind?" said the police officer. "It's time I should know," said the medical assistant, drawing the shirt over the body's chest. "However, I will send for Matthew Ivanovitch." "Let him have a look, Petrov, call him." And the medical assistant stepped away from the body. "Take him to the mortuary," said the police officer, "and then you must come into the office and sign," he added to the convoy soldier, who had not left the convict for a moment. "Yes, sir," said the soldier. The policeman lifted his body and carried it down again. Nekhludoff wished to follow, but Madame kept him back. "You are not in the plot." "Well, then, give me a cigarette," he said. Nekhludoff got out his cigarette case and gave him one. The madman, quickly moving his brows all the time, began relating how they tormented him by thought suggestion. "Why, they are all against me, and torment and torture me through their mediums." "I beg your pardon," said Nekhludoff. Without listening any further, he left the room and went out into the yard, wishing to know where the body would be put. The policemen, with their burden, had already crossed the yard, and were coming to the door of a cellar. Nekhludoff wished to go up to them, but the police officer stopped him. "What do you want?" "Nothing." "Nothing? Then go away." Nekhludoff obeyed, and went back to his isvostchik, who was dozing. He awoke him, and they drove back towards the railway station. They had not made 100 steps when they met a cart accompanied by a convoy soldier with a gun. On the cart lay another convict, who was already dead. The convict lay on his back in the cart, his shaved head, from which the pancake-shaped cap had slid over the back bearded face down to the nose, shaking and thumping at every jolt. The driver, in his heavy boots, walked by the side of the cart, holding the reins. A policeman followed on foot. Nekhludoff touched his isvostchik's shoulder. "Just look what they are doing," said the isvostchik, stopping his horse. Nekhludoff got down and, following the cart, again passed his sentinel, and entered the gate of the police station. By this time the firemen had finished washing the cart, and a tall, bony man, the chief of the fire brigade, with a colored band round his cap, stood in their place. and with his hands in his pockets was severely looking at a fat-necked, well-fed bay stallion that was being led up and down before him by a fireman. The stallion was lame on one of his forefeet, and the chief of the firemen was angrily saying something to a veterinary who stood by. The police officer was also present. When he saw the cart, he went up to the convoy soldier. "Where did you bring him from?" he asked, shaking his head disapprovingly. "From the Gorbatovskaya," answered the policeman. "A prisoner?" asked the chief of the fire brigade. "Yes, it's the second today." "Well, I must say, they've got some queer arrangements. Though, of course, it's a broiling day," said the chief of the fire brigade. Then, turning to the fireman who was leading the same stallion, he shouted, "Put him into the corner stall, and as to you, you hound, I'll teach you how to cripple horses which are worth more than you are, you scoundrel." The dead man was taken from the cart by the policeman just in the same way as the first had been, and carried upstairs into the hospital. Nekhludoff followed them as if he were hypnotized. "What do you want?" asked one of the policemen, but Nekhludoff did not answer, and followed where the body was being carried. The madman, sitting on a bed, was smoking greedily the cigarette Nekhludoff had given him. "Ah, you've come back," he said, and laughed. When he saw the body he made a face, and said, "Again, I am sick of it. I am not a boy, am I, eh?" And he turned to Nekhludoff with a questioning smile. Nekhludoff was looking at a dead man, whose face, which had been hidden by his cap, was now visible. This convict was as handsome in face and body as the other was hideous. He was a man in the full bloom of life, notwithstanding that he was disfigured by the half of his head being shaved. The straight, rather low forehead, raised a bit over the black, lifeless eyes, was very fine, and so, though Norse above the thin, black mustaches, there was a smile on the lips that were already growing blue. A small beard outlined the lower part of the face, and on the shaved side of the head a firm, well-shaped ear was visible. One could see what possibilities of a higher life had been destroyed in this man. The fine bones of his hands and shackled feet, the strong muscles of all his well-proportioned limbs, showed what a beautiful, strong, agile human animal this had been. As an animal, merely, he had been a far more perfect one of his kind than the bay stallion, about the laming of which the fireman was so angry. Yet he had been done to death, and no one was sorry for him as a man, nor was anyone sorry that so fine a working animal had perished. The only feeling evinced was that of annoyance because of the bother caused by the necessity of getting his body threatening putrefaction out of the way. The doctor and his assistant entered the hospital, accompanied by the inspector of the police station. The doctor was a thick-set man, dressed in pongee silk coat and trousers of the same material, closely fitting his muscular thighs. The inspector was a little fat fellow with a red face, round as a ball, which he made still broader by a habit he had of filling his cheeks with air, and slowly letting it out again. The doctor sat down on the bed by the side of the dead man, and touched the hands in the same way as his assistant had done, put his ear to the heart, rose and pulled his trousers straight. "Could not be more dead," he said. The inspector filled his mouth with air, and slowly blew it out again. "Which prison is he from?" he asked the convoy soldier. The soldier told him, and reminded him of the chains of the dead man's feet. "I'll have them taken off. We have got a smith about." "The Lord be thanked," said the inspector, and blew up his cheeks again. He went towards the door, slowly letting out the air. "Why has this happened?" Nekhludoff asked the doctor. The doctor looked at him through his spectacles. "Why has that happened?" "Why they die of sunstroke, you mean?" "This is why. They sit all through the winter, without exercise and without light, and suddenly they are taken out into the sunshine, and on a day like this, and they march in a crowd so that they get no air, and sunstroke is the result." "Then why are they sent out?" "Oh, as to that, go and ask those who send them. But I may ask, who are you?" "I am a stranger." "Ah, well, good afternoon. I have no time." The doctor was vexed. He gave his trousers a downward pull, and went towards the beds of the sick. "Well, how are you getting on?" he asked the pale man with the crooked mouth and bandaged neck. Meanwhile, the madman sat on a bed, and having finished his cigarette, kept spitting in the direction of the doctor. Nekhludoff went down into the yard and out of the gate, past the firemen's horses, and the hens, and the sentinel in his brass helmet, and got into the trap, the driver of which had again fallen asleep. End of Book 2, Chapter 37, recording by Chris Caron, Ham Lake, Minnesota.
Book 2, Chapter 38 of Resurrection. When Nekhludoff came to the station, the prisoners were all seated in railway carriages with grated windows. Several persons, come to see them off, stood on the platform, but were not allowed to come up to the carriages. The convoy was much troubled that day. On the way from the prison to the station, besides the two Nekhludoff had seen, 3 other prisoners had fallen and died of sunstroke. One was taken to the nearest police station, like the first 2, and the other 2 died at the railway station. In Moscow, in the beginning of the 8th decade of this century, 5 convicts died of sunstroke in one day on their way from the Buturki prison to the Nizhny railway station. The convoy men were not troubled because 5 men who might have been alive died while in their charge. This did not trouble them, but they were concerned lest anything that the law required in such cases should be omitted. To convey the bodies to the places appointed, to deliver up their papers, to take them off the list to be conveyed to Nizhny, all this was very troublesome, especially on so hot a day. It was this that occupied the convoy men, and before it could all be accomplished, Nekhludoff and the others, who asked for leave to go up to the carriages, were not allowed to do so. Nekhludoff, however, was soon allowed to go up, because he tipped the convoy sergeant. The sergeant let Nekhludoff pass, but asked him to be quick and get his talk over before any of the authorities noticed. There were 15 carriages in all, and except one carriage for the officials, they were full of prisoners. As Nekhludoff passed the carriages, he listened to what was going on in them. In all the carriages was heard the clanging of chains, the sound of bustle, mixed with loud and senseless language, but not a word was being said about their dead fellow prisoners. The talk was all about sacks, drinking water, and the choice of seats. Looking into one of the carriages, Nekhludoff saw convoy soldiers taking the manacles off the hands of the prisoners. The prisoners held out their arms, and one of the soldiers unlocked the manacles with a key and took them off. The other collected them. After he had passed all the other carriages, Nekhludoff came up to the women's carriages. From the second of these he heard a woman's groans. "Oh, oh, oh God! Oh, oh, oh God!" Nekhludoff passed this carriage and went up to a window of the 3rd carriage, which a soldier pointed out to him. When he approached his face to the window, he felt the hot air filled with the smell of perspiration coming out of it, and heard distinctly the shrill sound of women's voices. All the seats were filled with red, perspiring, loudly talking women dressed in prison cloaks and white jackets. Nekhludoff's face at the window attracted their attention. Those nearest ceased talking and drew closer. Maslova, in her white jacket and her head uncovered, sat by the opposite window. The white-skinned, smiling Theodosia sat a little nearer. When she recognized Nekhludoff, she nudged Maslova and pointed to the window. Maslova rose hurriedly, threw her kerchief over her black hair, and with a smile on her hot, red face, came up to the window and took hold of one of the bars. "Well, it is hot," she said with a glad smile. "Did you get the things?" "Yes, thank you." "Is there anything more you want?" asked Nekhludoff, while the air came out of the hot carriage as out of an oven. "I want nothing, thank you." "If we could get a drink?" said Theodosia. "Yes, if we could get a drink," repeated Maslova. "Why, have you not got any water?" "They put some in, but it is all gone." "Directly, I will ask one of the convoy men. Now, we shall not see each other till we get to Nizhny." "Why, are you going?" said Maslova, as if she did not know it, and looked joyfully at Nekhludoff. "I am going by the next train." Maslova said nothing, but only sighed deeply. "Is it true, sir, that 12 convicts have been done to death?" said a severe-looking old prisoner with a deep voice like a man's. It was Korableva. "I did not hear of 12. I have seen 2, said Nekhludoff. "They say there were 12 they killed, and will nothing be done to them? Only think, the fiends!" "And have none of the women fallen ill?" Nekhludoff asked. "Women are stronger," said another of the prisoners, a short little woman, and laughed. "Only there's one that has taken it into her head to be delivered. There she goes," she said, pointing to the next carriage, whence proceeded the groans. "You ask if we want anything," said Maslova, trying to keep the smile of joy from her lips. "Could not this woman be left behind, suffering as she is? There now, if you would tell the authorities." "Yes, I will." "And one thing more. Could she not see her husband, Taras?" she added, pointing with her eyes to the smiling Theodosia. "He is going with you, is he not?" "Sir, you must not talk," said a convoy sergeant, not the one who had let Nekhludoff come up. Nekhludoff left the carriage and went in search of an official to whom he might speak for the woman in travail and about Taras, but could not find him, nor get an answer from any of the convoy for a long time. They were all in a bustle. Some were leading a prisoner somewhere or other, others running to get themselves provisions. Some were placing their things in the carriages or attending on a lady who was going to accompany the convoy officer, and they answered Nekhludoff's questions unwillingly. Nekhludoff found the convoy officer only after the second bell had been rung. The officer, with his short arm, was wiping the moustaches that covered his mouth and shrugging his shoulders, reproving the corporal for something or other. "What is it you want?" he asked Nekhludoff. "You've got a woman there who is being confined, so I thought best." "Well, let her be confined. We shall see later on." And briskly, swinging his short arms, he ran up to his carriage. At the moment the guard passed with a whistle in his hand, and from the people on the platform and from the women's carriages there arose a sound of weeping and words of prayer. Nekhludoff stood on the platform by the side of Taras and looked how, one after the other, the carriages glided past him, with the shaved heads of the men at the grated windows. Then the first of the women's carriages came up, with women's heads at the windows, some covered with kerchiefs and some uncovered. Then the second, whence proceeded the same groans. Then the carriage where Maslova was. She stood with the others at the window and looked at Nekhludoff with a pathetic smile. End of Book 2, Chapter 38.